Hello and welcome to Good Game, the show for gamers, by gamers. I'm Bajo.
And I'm Junglist.
Now, Jung, we were worried that about this time of year, the flow of new games might dry up. Fears unfounded, it seems.
Godfather 2 follows the events of the 70s Oscar-winning movie, but is it cursed with movie-to-game equals lame syndrome? And for adult Wii owners, MadWorld is an ultra-violent but highly stylized maim-em-up.
Set in the Wanted universe, Wanted Weapons of Fate picks up where the film left off. But to balance out all that gore, cheese Junglist, Wallace and Gromit love this stuff almost as much as I do. But is it a tasty treat or on the nose?
Pacified all the bees, Gromit.
And we meet some of the best 8-bit musos performing and composing in Australia.
But first, Wallace and Gromit may have redefined claymation, but they're not the only ones to use the technique in a game. Can you name this one?
Answer at the end of the show. News time, badge.
A study done by the University of Rochester and the University of Tel Aviv has found that action-orientated video games can actually improve eyesight. Study playing last-generation shooters Unreal Tournament 2004 and Call of Duty 2 were able to increase their contrast perception by over 50%, and their ability to tell between different shades of grey improved by over 40%. Another group in the study playing The Sims 2, a much more placid game, showed no improvement in their eyesight at all. The Professor of Brain and Cognitive Sciences at Rochester, Daphne Bevelia, has gone as far as saying video games may become officially recognised as a technique to improve eyesight problems when used to complement current treatments. Fans of the rally racing game Colin McRae Dirt mourned when the real Colin McRae met an untimely death with his son in a helicopter crash. But this has not stopped plans for a sequel. Colin McRae Dirt 2 is currently in production with another driver, Ken Block. Ken Block credits Colin McRae with inspiring him to become a rally driver in the first place. Games developers from around the world gathered in San Francisco last week for the annual Games Developers Conference. As usual, the event was used to make some announcements. This year we'll see a new Zelda game for the DS called The Legend of Zelda Spirit Tracks. Developers Infinity Ward are working on a new Modern Warfare game due out in November. Interestingly, the Call of Duty name was not linked to it, leaving pundits to theorise that Modern Warfare might become a series in its own right. And the launch of a new gaming console, Zibo, was announced. Specifically built for gamers in Brazil, Russia, India and China, the machine is an attempt to combat piracy, which is rife in those territories where gamers, unable to afford next-gen consoles, turn to illegal ways to satisfy their urge to play. Zibo is based on mobile phone technology and games can be downloaded only.
Good game!
One surefire way to get some attention in the gaming biz is to make the most gory, vulgar game possible. The latest to take this path is MadWorld for the Wii. You might already be familiar with some of the downright brutal moves the game is already famous for, even before it was released.
Trouble is, especially in Australia, how do you get your game past the classifier? The solution? Make it black and white, showing only red for blood, and stylize it as much as possible. This allows MadWorld to be pretty diverse in its range of maiming options, and indeed, the player is encouraged to be as creative as possible. After all, variety is the spice of death.
It's a Smash TV-like setting, or Running Man if you will. You play Jack, a contestant in a game show where it's kill or be killed. Stage by stage, you'll fight waves of punks until you finally take on a boss.
You kind of get used to the graphical style after a while. The controls are also easy to get the hang of, using the motion sensing controls for bigger hits.
And most enemies just shamble towards you at the start, giving you plenty of time to plan your attack. But you can't just kill them, you need to do it spectacularly.
So usually, instead of just going to town with a chainsaw that's attached to your right arm, you'll maybe shove a tire over their head first. Then, perhaps, impale their head with a signpost. And for a finisher, well, the rose bush is always good. Or you could take out the trash, as they say. You're encouraged to use the environment around you, and the more you do this, the more points you get, which means the quicker you'll get to the challenges.
Challenges are pretty simple. There'll be some mechanical monstrosities such as the Rocket Reamer or the Turbinator, and it's up to you to throw hordes of street punks into said death machine. These are usually pretty easy, but they're fun because they're funny, and they break up action that would get old pretty quick.
Yeah, and for a game that encourages you to be imaginative, there aren't too many ways to take out the lower level goons, and they can get a bit grindy. The barrels and tires and rose bushes, they're all over the place. But at least at the end of the level, you're presented with a pretty cool boss fight, which I thought was the best part of the game.
They're not particularly complicated. Normally you just bait one in for an attack and then sneak in one of your own. But the characters are just cool. And for every sweet boss fight, there's an equally sweet finishing move using the motion sensor control, such as whirling a giant metal ball into a guy's face, or just going nuts with some Wild Wild West revolvers.
And you know, we think we're so cool because in Wii Sports, we don't actually swing the Wiimote like a tennis racket, we just twitch the wrist. But in this game, it's actually kind of fun to stand up and pretend you're swinging that giant metal ball into the guy's head.
Yeah, it's a good point. I never felt comfortable standing up and waving my arms about like they do in those Wii ads, you know. Now that I'm impaling someone's head with a road sign, somehow that makes it okay. Does that make me a bad person?
Yep, it does. So each level you take out a bunch of minions and then you get a pretty cool boss. This is sounding like the game No More Heroes should have been. I mean, it's got all the best bits, but without the pretension.
But Jung, I thought you were into, experiencing different types of games, doing different things.
Just because it's intentionally bad doesn't mean it's not bad.
Well, I admit to having some fun in MadWorld, but it is mindless fun. And like No More Heroes, it can be a bit grindy. You need to walk in knowing that you're playing this game for the boss fights. I'm giving it 7 out of 10 rubber chickens.
Yeah, the novelty of taking out the lower level thugs wears off quick, but if you kind of approach it with the right mood, just kind of treat it like an Arnie movie, it can be pretty fun. I'm giving it 7 out of 10 rubber chickens.
The Ninja Gaiden games have always been renowned as being hard, but most would agree that Ninja Gaiden 2 took some cheap shots at gamers to bump up the difficulty. Some enemies would just blow up in your face after you kill them. Some would just blast you with a barrage of rockets or fireballs from a distance. But the worst offender in the game was this boss. Once defeated, he would explode like a nuke in a short cutscene, killing you instantly. It wasn't until you held down the block button during this 3-second cutscene that you would actually defeat the boss. Personally, I beat this boss 4 times before even thinking about pushing block during a cutscene. Maybe they thought that interactive cutscenes were all the rage, but most of us thought, what were they thinking?
Good game!
The original Godfather game, based on the original Godfather movie, was always a bit of a lackluster Grand Theft Auto, but still surprisingly fun. Godfather 2 attempts to pull us back in, and this time, of course, is based on the second movie.
Michael, the youngest brother behind Fredo, took over the reins. He and Tom led a war against the 5 families. They pulled the strings, and my boss, Aldo Trapani, pulled the trigger.
You play as Dominic, the new head of New York under Michael Corleone. There's a lot of familiar moments, and characters look and sound like they should, all except for Michael.
Yeah, it's a massive shame not having Al Pacino in the game. I guess he was busy, John. After you've created your mob face, all of which look very mob-like, you set about getting a crew together and taking over the town. You need to bring the right crew member to the right job. If there's a lot of resistance, you'll need a medic. Engineers cut through wire. And brawlers can bust through doors and take out phones so your enemy can't call for backup.
Don't make me fucking shoot you.
When you go out on a job, not only do you have to wipe out the rival crew, but you also have to interrogate the boss in the establishment. It's fun roughing them up, and the sooner you find their weakness, such as smashing up their shop or leaning them over a railing, the sooner they'll give up their racket.
The interrogation controls are a bit imprecise, but I still had heaps of fun throwing these guys around, Junk, especially because in the cutscene, when they've given up the joint, you can continue laying in the punches.
Christ, I get your point. The racket's yours, okay?
Even in the shadow of MadWorld, this is still a pretty brutal game. The finishing moves are both shocking and awesome at the same time.
Showing up.
It's pretty fun charging around town, slowly taking over, but after a while, kind of starts to feel the same. It's all go from point A to point B, bring the right crew member, kill everyone, over and over again.
Yeah, I must say I tired of the missions pretty fast. The strength here is in the writing and in the fighting.
So this deal, does anyone else know about it?
Just you, me, and Tom Hagen. I need to bring Tom in on this, but he can take from my share of the cut.
You can do favors for people about town for cash or other rewards, but it's a bit weird how Dominic just walks up to a random person on the street and says, "Hey, you look like you need a favor."
You got something on your mind?
Looks like you need some help.
I'll be straight with you. I'm asking you to commit a crime.
A lot of your time is spent managing your crew, and some favors give you kill conditions for other made men. And these guys are pretty tough, and you need to kill them in exactly the right way to send a message, or they'll keep coming back. It's not really essential to take them out if you have enough guards, but it's a lot of fun.
As your establishments get attacked, you'll need to send in your own wise guys to defend them. And you can send them off to attack other territories as well, so there's some nice divide and conquer ideas in all this, but the AI isn't really strong enough to do it. So usually it'll end up taking ages or just not happening at all, and you'll have to go in yourself to do it.
Yeah, it's like they can't work out how to get through barriers, and they just kill everyone they can and then just stand about waiting for you to come and help them. In fact, sometimes I had trouble myself just getting through simple barriers. Like I've said before, Junk, every game needs a jump button, and it can become infuriating here when you take over a joint and you can see the exit, but you can't leap over a box to get there. You have to go and find the way you came in and get out. Ah!
Well, seeing as most of the game is taking over joints, it's hard not to be frustrated by a building with no exits and impenetrable 10-centimeter ledges. It wouldn't happen in real life, and it takes you out of the game. A GPS system would have been nice too. At least the combat's good, and it has a decent cover system. We especially like the Molotovs, shotguns, and explosions.
Awesome explosions. It's also lots of fun crashing and vaulting through windows when there's a perfectly good door available. Sometimes you'll let your crew lay down some cover fire just so you can go the melee, but if you get caught civilian bashing, not only will the police be onto you, but also you have to put up with the relentless whinging of your crew, who seem to have some sort of morality complex and conscience, which is unusual for a gangster.
Stop messing around, Tom. They don't need to suffer, understand?
It feels like they're being forced to say it by some sort of ethical donkey.
Ethical donkey?
Yeah, it's an in-game metaphorical donkey that harasses video game characters who are doing bad things.
Where are you getting this stuff from?
I ate a lot of sugar. Open world games, are getting less punishing with their rule set with every generation, and there's too many video game rules in Godfather 2, and this makes you not want to enjoy and explore the open world, but merely tolerate it.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, the population in some areas is pretty down as well. There's not too much traffic, and you can count the car selection on one hand. I guess we need to see more because we're used to seeing better, and it appears a 30-year gap is not enough to stop the movie to game equals lame formula. I'm giving it 6 out of 10 rubber chickens.
Yeah, I'm gonna give it 6 as well.
Good game!
Well, that's 2 very violent games in the episode this week, but violent in a different way. Hey, John.
Yeah, MadWorld goes for that distinctive artistic style which hides its brutality, whereas Godfather goes for the more realistic approach.
But just because the violence in MadWorld is artified, does that mean it's justified?
Well, for me, I enjoy a good mame-a-thon. I mean, that's pretty much what God of War was, as long as it's got the variety to maintain it. And Godfather, the movies were violent, so you don't walk into that expecting it to be all hugs and kisses, but I do think the violence has more impact because of its realism.
Yeah, and I'm glad that games are being made for adults only, but I look forward to a time when an adult game doesn't necessarily equal a violent game.
Moving on now to a game where the only violence involves petals and honey, and the only weapon shoots porridge.
Wallace and Gromit Fright of the Bumblebees is the first episode of 4 for PC and Xbox Live Arcade.
An heck, Gromit! Giant bees!
It's developed by Telltale Games, who in the past have worked on Sam & Max and even have some ties to Monkey Island.
So they're well at home when it comes to adventure games. Taking control of both Wallace and Gromit, you're tasked by one of the townspeople to fulfill an enormous honey order.
And this is a problem because you don't have enough flowers to do it. One of many problems, in fact, that you'll encounter in the game, and you'll need all of Wallace's charm and Gromit's brains to solve them.
You can't help but giggle at the awkward situations that Wallace Wallace finds himself in, and the puzzles are clever, logical, and they don't use process of elimination or anything like that. Often you'll get hints from the people around you, and more than once you'll be uttering an understanding, ah.
Like any good adventure game, you'll discover objects early on that'll become more important later. Also, the interaction is fairly solid. You walk around with the WSAD keys, and you're still gonna find that moment though where you didn't realize something was clickable.
Yeah, that can be frustrating, but it's pretty normal for these types of games. Our only real complaint is that sometimes the music is too loud and you can't turn it down, which means the excellent dialogue gets drowned out.
You can go if you like.
Yes, that's all very well, I suppose. But I need a good stirred like the one I had in the war.
Also, there are a few bugs here and there in the animation and interface, but nothing that really impacts the game in any major way.
Well, I guess that's 2 complaints then.
Indeed.
Hang on, Miss Flint.
The strongest part of this game is how true it stays to the editing, music, and writing of the show. It's like being in an episode, and if you've ever watched Wallace and Gromit, you know that feeling of just wanting to reach into the TV and help them out.
Other than the awesome yet un-Aussie released Harvey Birdman game, I haven't really played an adventure game in years, John. Mainly because I never really think I'm going to have a good time with them. But when the genre is done right, like it is here, you can't help but come out of it with a sense of joy and accomplishment, and you will get a smile on your face from Wallace and Gromit. I'm giving it 9.
Last one, nearly done. I need another thing. Or like a person or animal.
Gentlemen?
Yes, that's a thing.
Some puzzles, like the word game, have great imagination behind them, and we love the boss fight at the end. Depending on your deduction skills, it'll probably take you about 4 hours to finish this game, and they're great hours, so I'm giving it 8 out of 10 rubber chickens.
Good game.
My name is Alex Yabsley. I'm also known as Dot.AY, and I make chiptune music. Chiptune is basically music made on obsolete computers, mostly video game consoles, so Nintendo Game Boys, Commodore 64s and Ataris and things like that. The newer computers and newer consoles use kind of sampled sounds, whereas the older consoles were basically a synthesizer in themselves, and so each has a distinct sound, and so it's really fun exploring all the possibilities of that.
My name's Tom Gilmore. I play under the alias 10,000 Free Men and Their Families, and I write music using Game Boys. Although I still have a big interest in gaming, I think the music's definitely taken over. Game Boy Australia was a blog that Alex and I started, essentially where we're trying to bring everyone in the scene together, which I think it did to an extent.
My name's Sebastian Tomchak, aka Little Scale, and I make chiptunes, so I'm a chiptune artist. I'm in the process of getting a PhD at the moment. Part of my PhD is all about taking consoles that haven't been used so much for music before and then creating computer interfaces for those consoles. And so hopefully this will open up all these different new sounds to the community. This whole chiptune movement is the idea that we're going back and looking at this obsolete technology and then sort of pulling it and pushing it in ways that it might not have been used before.
I first got involved making chiptunes at university when I was studying music technology. I was really looking for music that was kind of experimental whilst being really fun, kind of not taking itself too seriously, and chiptunes is definitely something that does that, because while I'm making the music it feels like I'm playing. It's not so much something that's kind of a chore, which is what university started to feel like. What I really try and aim for is to get those sounds that are so familiar to people and try and kind of twist them into sounding like something else.
I bought my first Game Boy in 2007, so that's pretty recent, really. It's recognisable by virtually anyone that's ever played a Game Boy, which means that I already have an audience whether they realise it or not. I think people come to the shows for a good time because it's good fun and it's reminiscent of their past, but also the music of the future.
When I started with computers, they took an entire floor and they were accompanied by men in white coats watching the reel-to-reels going around. In those days, they probably had as much random memory as your wristwatch does now. Yeah, my name's Jim Cuomo. I was born in Chicago a long time ago. And I've been using computers since the 60s. I went to the University of Illinois as a composer. And I thought that when I left that university setting that I would never touch another computer again. And then in the 80s, suddenly the personal computers popped up. And I said, oh boy, let's get back into it. So I did. When I started using the computers again, I was programming them for my compositions. And inevitably, some software companies showed up and asked me to write music for games. So I did Defender of the Crown. And of course, that at the time was a huge hit. And I find people still remember it. That's extraordinary, of course. And then by 1990, when computers could credibly sound like a real violin or a real trumpet, I lost interest. But then a few years ago, I started getting emails saying, are you still alive? And are you the Jim Cuomo who wrote Defender of the Crown? Yes and yes. And would you like to perform with those games live? So I said, of course I would.
Very much looking forward to playing with Jim tonight. He's a bit of a hero, a bit of a legend. He's going to blow us away. I know it.
This is from Defender of the Crown. Yes. Yes, he says.
The computers that existed in the 80s made sounds that were unique. Composers who are interested in sound, well, there's a wonderful challenge to be able to put sounds together that don't exist in nature and come up with something that, dare I say, might even be pretty.
Wanted Weapons of Fate is set in the Wanted universe and picks up where the film left off, which will be relevant to you if you're able to sit through that awful excuse for cinema right to the end, only to see Wesley break the fourth wall by turning to the camera and going, what have you done lately?
This is me taking back control of my life. What the fuck have you done lately?
Not your favorite film, then?
No, Jung, and for once the film actually hurts the game because it expands and extrapolates all the smugness that it entailed with every single awful line of dialogue.
And this is coming from a dude who flunked gym.
Ugh, I'm an assassin. I can curve bullets. I can get my kill orders from a loom. Ugh. Wow! Wow! Wow!
Smugness and Badger's slightly biased film review aside, Wanted Weapons of Fate is a game with good parts and bad parts. The good part is in the cover system. By leaning in a direction, you can switch to any cover in range that's in front or to the side of you.
Okay, I'll stop. This has been number 4, like in Gears, but there's a lot more importance placed on it here, and it's a lot more important to do it. You can't see much when you're actually in cover, so you'll be doing a lot of leaning and peeking, and every kill gives you a free adrenaline point, which you can spend on a curved bullet.
Curved bullets are great for getting behind enemies' shields or getting them to come out of cover. There's a more fun way to use your adrenaline bonus though, and that's a slow motion dash to the next bit of cover, taking out enemies along the way.
You can spam fire, which suppresses enemies, and you need to use all of these abilities when you're taking down a boss. Other than that, there's really not much to the game. There are really only 3 types of enemies and 2 types of guns, a gun and a minigun.
Yeah, it's really just a weapon and a faster weapon. You can see how they've set up some scenarios that require you to use a particular adrenaline skill, and that's done nice and subtly.
More subtle than the mines. I mean, seriously, if you're gonna try and blow someone's leg off with a mine, why would you put a disco ball on top of it? Come on.
The game works, it's pretty enough, it's just short and not much fun. Not even a Morgan Freeman cameo helps.
Now, you have seen it with your own eyes.
I'm giving it 5.5 out of 10 rubber chickens.
There's just not enough variety, and there's so much cheese, but not even the good type of cheese. It's the bad sort of cheese that is lame and just makes you end up hating the main character. And mice with dynamite strapped on them? What were they thinking? Who had time to strap that dynamite on? I'm giving it 5.
You know, I didn't think the movie was all that bad.
Sorry about that.
Good game.
So, did you guess the game for this week?
It was the Neverhood Chronicles, an adventure puzzler released for the PC and PlayStation in 1996. You played as this happy chappy called Clayman. In classic adventure style, you led him through the game solving puzzles to eventually save the world from the evil King Clog.
As you can see, everything in the game was clay-mated, from the levels themselves to every frame of animation. That brilliant style, combined with a quirky sense of humour and an engrossing soundtrack, made it a critical success, but it didn't sell well. But those that bought it, however, loved it, and today it's still regarded as one of gaming's most underrated games.
Next week, we go on an Easter egg hunt and backwards compatible into gamers that has absolutely nothing to do with chocolate.
Battle Forge follows the conventions of Magic the Gathering, the old card game, except in real-time strategy format.
And what category are you? Hardcore or casual? Something in between? We take a look at the games that refuse to be labeled.
Don't forget to drop by the forums and leave your thoughts about the show or gaming in general. Also, time is running out to submit an entry into the ABC and Screen Australia's Serious Games Initiative. Read more about it here. Until next week, gamers, Bajo out.
Junglist out.
You sound like the A-team there.
I pity the fool that sticks around after 27 minutes is up.
Good game.